My name is Herb and I'm an alcoholic. Welcome to our 2019 telephone big book step workshop. And I would invite you to relax now. We're here, we're starting. Take a deep breath and join me in that set aside prayer, which is a confirmation of your commitment to having an open mind and an open heart. God, please set aside everything that I think I know about myself, my brokenness, my spiritual path, and you, for an open mind and a new experience of myself, my brokenness, my spiritual path, and especially you. Please join me in the serenity prayer. God, grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, courage to change the things I can, and wisdom to know the difference. Wisdom is that combination of knowledge and experience. We learn typically from our mistakes, and we only learn if we acknowledge that we make mistakes and be clear that we are not a mistake. We just make mistakes. And when we're conscious of that, then we can learn to make mistakes less frequently and to correct them more quickly. And that's called wisdom. So we have launched our journey on this path, and the first time we got together was an orientation where you had an understanding as to what we're doing, and the first assignment, which was to take a look at step 12, just a narrow part of it. The first part, a spiritual awakening, because that's the point. That's the mission, that's the purpose of this workshop. The next several months, certainly 12 at a minimum, on a weekly basis, we will be meeting to take a look at the big book progressively, almost program learning, to take a look at each step and to unpack each step. As I mentioned, I believe we'll be spending at least 3 months on the first step. Bill uses an architectural analogy for the first step. He gives it to us in the second step, and he doesn't say it as clearly as I'm giving it to you here, but that's the foundation. He said, we're building an arch through which we walk to a new freedom. We're building a spiritual arch through which we walk to a new freedom. The assumption then is, on my part, that the step 1 is the foundation, and we dig deep and broad, and it's dark. We look at the addiction, the first half of the first step. And that's a problem. It is a problem. But Bill is very clear in the big book, it's not the problem. The problem is unmanageability, the spiritual malady. And so this approach is taking a look at step 1 of powerlessness through the lens of power. We looked at spiritual awakening, and today, part of your assignment from last week was to take a look at prayer and meditation in the big book, and I'll talk about it. What it is and how to do it, so that if in fact you have a practice, it can be refreshed perhaps, and you can have a new elevated motivation. And if in fact you're not having a morning meditation practice, that you will begin one. And I don't mean quiet time. I know that's terminology in your spiritual kit of tools. And each of you handles it quite differently, is my experience. And it's wonderful. It's a great commitment. But I mean meditation. And we'll talk some more about that here in a minute. In terms of the spiritual awakening, we talked about it being a change in the way we think and feel and behave. And I hear people say, gosh, I really want to know more about the spiritual part of the program. And I had one of the old wisdom teachers early in my sobriety say, there's only two sides to the program. One is spiritual and the other is the outside, because it's all spiritual. The whole point of the 12-step process is to find and have a relationship with power. A relationship, that's what spirituality is. It's a relationship with power, the first 3 steps. It's a relationship with ourself, the second 4 steps, 4 through 7. And a relationship with others. You could take a look at steps 8 and 9, or steps 8, 9, and 10. I like that, 8, 9, and 10, because it really is about our relationship with other people. Although step 10 and 11 and 12 are called Our Way of Life by Bill, this is the spiritual tool, the spiritual toolkit actually, that allows us to, in fact, maintain our spiritual condition and expand and improve our spiritual condition, because we're not cured, he said. Even though we're recovered by implication in the big book, in step 10, he says, we have been placed in a position of neutrality once we've finished the last of the 9th step amends. We're placed in a position of neutrality, and in step 10, he says, we enter the world of the spirit. We come out of the world of self. Steps 1 through 9 is the deflation of the ego at death. We enter into the world of the spirit. Bill calls it the 4th dimension. Well, what do we mean by 4th dimension? Pretty straightforward. I have glasses on, and when I go to a movie, sometimes they give me glasses to go over my glasses, and on the side it says 3D. That's 3-dimensional. That tells me as a human being that there are 3 dimensions in our material world: height, width, and depth. The 4th dimension, at least in the connotation in the big book by Bill in 1939, the 4th dimension was the spiritual, the immaterial, the invisible, the not measurable, the world of the spirit. Next week, I would like to take a look at step 10, and that's part of assignment 2. Assignment 2, items number 3, 4, and 5. In the assignment pages that I'm assuming that you downloaded and have a hard copy of. Part of assignment 2 also was taking a look at items number 1 and 2. Number 1, which was doing a reading and reflection on the Roman numeral pages from the title page up to the doctor's opinion, but not including the doctor's opinion, and reading it with those 4 questions in mind that are in item number 1. Not answering them, holding the question. As I mentioned earlier, one of my teachers, Richard Rohr, says we ask a question in the milieu of prayer. Hopefully that set aside attitude and that set aside prayer. We ask a question and we hold the question in the milieu of prayer and allow the energy of an asked but unanswered question to take us to a place that we actually didn't know existed, to give us new knowledge and a new experience. And then at the end of the reading. So take your time with it. We won't get there for a couple weeks in terms of moving on toward the doctor's opinion. Take your time with it, but once you're finished the reading to the way that you're going to do it, reading and highlighting those things that are of interest to you or resonate with you, then answer those questions, a sentence or a paragraph or a page, each question, however you want to do it. Some people are more engaged, not engaged, but more verbal than other people. But there's no, once again, there's no rules with this. It's just like, be honest with yourself, your thoughts and your feelings and your inclinations and your inspirations and your resistances and any positive or negative stuff that comes up as the result of these questions. It's just for you to become more conscious. This is a process, it's not an event, and you'll really have that experience. Now, you will have pops. You will have spiritual experiences, little ones, big ones, during this entire process, and it's unpredictable when and where. But the whole point of it is about a spiritual awakening, in contrast to that spiritual experience, the spiritual awakening that allows you to become more conscious. Gurdjieff, a Russian philosopher, said, human beings are asleep dreaming that they're awake. I love wisdom sayings like that. I may have mentioned it before. Bill really intuited that when he said the purpose of this process in step 12 is awakening. That's literally what we're doing. Not only waking up spiritually, but you'll find waking up psychologically, waking up emotionally. Amazing. I didn't know that I didn't know, and I couldn't see that I didn't see. And as I began this process, a new light was shown on the path so that I could walk it more effectively. That dimmer switch analogy. So step 11 says sought through prayer and meditation. Bill is indicating right there, there's two aspects to step 11. Two tools, prayer and meditation. And I've heard it wonderfully expressed in the rooms, very succinctly, with deep wisdom. Prayer is when we're talking, meditation is when we're listening. Now, the key for me in 1988, when I went through this steps work, was this man asked me to look up meditation in a dictionary. You know that I spent 7 years in a monastery, 7 years of silence, reading books and having teachers and spending lots of time in meditation. But when I left the monastery in 1964, after 7 years of silence, I didn't meditate again for another 25 years. Why is that? Well, because I didn't know what I was doing. I didn't know how to. I hung that robe on the wall and I walked out not meditating again for 25 years because just like the black robe, it had been put on me from the outside. It hadn't grown up from the inside. And this man, 4 years sober, 1988, asked me to look up the word meditation in a dictionary. Now, that was part of the assignment, and I hope you did that. My dictionary, among many dictionaries and many definitions, the one I liked the best was directed thinking. Please hear that. Directed thinking. There's so much misunderstanding and ignorance, not knowing, about meditation. And I think some of it's historical because in the 50s and the 60s and the 70s, the teachers from the East came over with their practice. And they talk about emptiness and silence and distance from the mind and quiet and stillness and so many other words that completely mean 100% different than any activity of the mind. No thinking was their definition of meditation. Well, English is their second language. They did the best they could. They just didn't look up the word carefully enough. Because the word they're talking about for the practice they practice is contemplation. Contemplation is emptiness. Contemplation is relationship. Contemplation is the stilling and the quiet of the mind. Sitting in the presence, capital P. Like sitting in the open space in the sunlight in order to get tanned. Sitting in the presence of God. Contemplation comes from the Latin word templare, meaning temple space, the sacred space. Perhaps this divinity, this spirit, this life force is deep inside of me. That's Bill's speculation in chapter 4. And so I sit quietly in its presence, allowing its presence to have its way with me. That's contemplation. That's not step 11 in the big book. I'll come back to that in a minute. Step 11 in the big book starts out upon awakening. We ask God to direct our thinking. Bill knew the definition of meditation. He received his training from the Oxford group. They use meditation for guidance. They would pray a little. God, please open my heart, open my mind, allow me to know your will for me. And then they would read a little scripture. And then they would meditate, seeking guidance. And they would actually keep a notepad and a pen next to them so that when they had a thought or a feeling or an awareness or an intuition, they would write it down as guidance. Man said, we ask God to direct our thinking, and then we begin thinking, trusting that the thoughts we have are given are an answer to the prayer. That's not in the big book, but that was his interpretation of what it meant. The instructions in the big book, we ask God to direct our thinking. Okay, God, please direct my thinking. No, it's that simple. Please make it simple. God, please direct my thinking. Now here's where he gave me the key that opened the door to meditation. And I've not had a problem with meditation since 1988 because of it. He said, then we begin thinking, just like the instructions in the big book. We think about the 24 hours ahead. We consider our plans for the day. There are two instructions. We think about the 24 hours ahead. We consider our plans for the day. Bill doesn't tell us what that means. I made up a definition. We think about the 24 hours ahead, which is my schedule, my behavior. What am I going to do today? Is there anything on the radar screen, in my radar sweep of my day, in my imagination, looking at my day planner, at my schedule, that's out of line with my understanding of spiritual principles, of God's will for me today? I just do a sweep. I look at my calendar. Nope, I'm pretty much planning not to do anything out of alignment with my understanding of spiritual principles. Okay, then the second question, consider your plans today. Bill doesn't give us a definition, but I made up one. If think about the 24 hours ahead is about my behavior, then perhaps consider your plans for the day is about my attitude. It's about my being. Who am I going to be today? And I do a radar sweep of the day. What is my plan? And typically what I'll do is a little retrospect on yesterday. This is my practice in the morning. I'll take a look at yesterday and see, was there any character defect that de jour that popped for me? Oh, I see, I was a little impatient yesterday. Joe might have experienced that. We were on the line together and I was looking at trying to work some technology and I couldn't do it very effectively. And I was pretty intense because I was pretty squeezed for time. But that's no excuse. It is a fact, but it's not an excuse for not having the patience and the kindness that I want to be. That's who I want to be. And so today I say, okay, today I'm going to be kinder today, because yesterday I wasn't so. Or maybe I wasn't patient. Today I will be patient. Or maybe yesterday I was distracted and today I'll be more mindful. Make it really practical. I want to be a better human being. What am I invited to do to change? My attitude and my behavior. Really simple. You know, I don't spend a half an hour on quiet time in meditation. A couple minutes of prayer. I open my morning practice with the set aside prayer. And then I pray the third step prayer. Not as a new prayer, but as a renewal and a recommitment. The third step, to be in alignment with my understanding of reality, to be in alignment. And then I do my meditation practice. And then, quite frankly, after I finish my meditation practice, which might be about 5 minutes of thinking and listening to my thinking, then I do my contemplative practice. I have incorporated a contemplative practice. It's beyond the big book. It's part of the Way of Life document that's in the back of your download that you made on step 11. There's about 5 pages. That's a script that takes you through the prayers and the process and prayer and meditation together, and then a little section on contemplation if somebody wants to incorporate that. I did this work of the steps in 1988, in which I then understood and practiced meditation on a daily basis. In 1989, Father Thomas Keating, a Trappist monk, did a teaching here locally for 3 days, which I attended, and he exposed me to the meaning of and the practice of contemplation, which I saw as a perfect supplement and complement to step 11, so I incorporated that. And what Bill anticipated that we would use step 11 for is guidance. Guidance for the day, guidance for your life. If you have a practice of prayer and meditation and or quiet time that includes prayer and meditation or doesn't, maybe you want to include 1 minute of deep listening. That's meditation from my standpoint. Not praying, not reading, not having a guided meditation. No. Quietly listening to the wee small voice deep inside of us, responding to the invitation of prayer. Direct my thinking. And then I listen. I've never heard God talk to me audibly through my ears. Never once. I have heard what I call the Spirit revealed to me in guidance all the time, through my inspiration, through my instinct, through my intuition, different parts, my head, my heart, my gut, wherever that awareness, wherever that consciousness comes from. And I listen. And with practice, we get better. The man who became my spiritual director, because I went to him and I said, I'm with a meditation practice after 1988. I was bored after a year of 15 minutes a day. And he said, Herb, you've made it a task. And it's not a task, it's a process. He said, you're responsible for the effort, not the results. What a relief that was. I'm responsible for the effort, not the results. He said, there's only 2 mistakes that you can make in meditation. One is to not show up, and the other is to leave early. If you've committed to a minute, stay a minute. If you've committed to 5, stay 5. If you've committed to 15, stay 15. In meditation, not in any other kind of activity. Bill does include reading and praying as part of a meditation model in step 11 in the 12 and 12. He was under the tutelage of Father Ed Dowling, a Jesuit priest who he met in 1940. A Jesuit priest is a particular religious order of Catholic priests, and I refer to them as the Navy SEALs. They are the especially trained academic and spiritual people throughout the world. And they've been around since the 12th century. Anyway, he was a teacher, a professor at St. Louis University, read the big book, saw in 1940, when it was first printed, that it was a spiritual book, and came to visit Bill to get to find out more about him. And they got along so well, Bill engaged him as his spiritual director. Now, the interesting part of that, and you may or may not know who Ed Dowling is, there is a book out of Hazleton called The Soul of Sponsorship, which includes the letters from Ed Dowling and Bill to each other over a span of 20 years. Ed Dowling died in 1960. So he was Bill's spiritual director from 1940 to 1960. Ed Dowling was a compulsive overeater. And he said, if this can work for alcohol, maybe it'll work for me. That's his first meeting with Bill. Bill was so impressed with his spiritual understanding as well as his humility that he engaged him as his spiritual director for the next 20 years. The key to meditation is practice. As this spiritual director indicated to me, there's only two mistakes that you can make: not show up and leave early. You're responsible for the effort, not the results. He did say to me as I was leaving his office, if you want to know if your meditation practice is effective, Herb, it's appropriate to look at it. Wait 3 months when you have a consistent daily meditation practice, and then ask your wife how you're treating her. Pay attention to how you drive on the freeway. Pay attention to how you interact with retail sales personnel. Because if in fact your meditation is effective, you will change. You will be a better human being. You will be a kinder human being. You will be a more considerate human being. You will care and you will be conscious. The litmus test of my meditation is not my thinking or my knowledge or my feeling. The litmus test of the validity and effectiveness of my meditation is my behavior. And that's a real confrontation for us. That's a real challenge for each of us. Take a look. How are you behaving? Are you being consistent with your own integrity, with your own principles? And if you are, terrific. And if you're not, maybe you want to take a look at that. Of course, that's what we're doing here, aren't we? There's lots of reasons to do meditation. The research is conclusive. If you want to be healthier, meditate. You will live longer and you will be biologically healthier. Less heart attacks, less stroke, less cancer. The research is conclusive. If you want to have more stable, harmonious emotions, personally feeling a sense of contentment, meditate. The research is conclusive. Look at Dan Siegel's work out of UCLA, Siegel. He's a psychiatrist who specializes in brain evaluation and understanding. One of his books is Mind Sight. You might enjoy that. If you want better relationships with people, it's good sociology. Meditate. And your relationships with other people will improve. It's very clear, the value proposition. But biology and psychology and sociology are not step 11. They're just human development, which is great, but it's not step 11. Bill says in the 12 and 12, in step 11 in his commentary, the value proposition that I like to put before you and I have personally embraced. Why do you meditate? Bill says, in the same way that air, water, sunshine, and food sustain and nourish the body, prayer and meditation nourish and sustain the soul. Do you believe it? Do you believe step 11 itself? It gives us the mission, it gives us the value proposition, it gives us the purpose of meditation, doesn't it? Sought through prayer and meditation to improve my conscious contact. Oh, that's the whole point of meditation. I repeat step 11 every morning after I say the set aside and the third step prayer as intentionally as I can, as thoughtfully and consciously as I can. Then I repeat step 11 as consciously as I can because it reminds me of why I'm here. I dedicate about 30 minutes in the morning. It grew from a minute to 5 to 10 to 15. And then when I met Father Keating, it grew to 20. And since I've retired in 2006, it's grown to 30 minutes in the morning. Not because I time it anymore. I timed it while I was working so that I didn't have to think about the timing. I set the timer for the time that I allotted. And when the timer went off, that's when I was done and not a moment sooner. If you want a practice of meditation, the way I'm describing it, active listening, an engagement of your mind and an awareness and consciousness and a watching of and an interpretation of your thinking and of feelings and awareness and consciousness. If you want, start with 1 minute if you don't do it. Start with 1 minute. Doesn't sound like very much, but if you're not doing it, it's more than you're doing now. And then allow the Spirit to lead you to 2 minutes or 5 minutes or whatever it is. Don't be that type A behavior that is task-oriented and trying to accomplish, well, I'm going to do 20. No, that's not a good idea. Practice the practice. My spiritual director has a mantra. All people on a spiritual path have a spiritual practice. And they practice their practice. And when they're faithful to their practice is faithful to them. And I look back over my shoulder and it's absolutely true. At least that's my story and my interpretation of my life. Of course, step 11 assumes a healthy understanding and experience with steps 2 and 3. You might take a look at what it is you believe about higher power, what it is you believe about God, what it is you've made a decision about in step 3 in terms of a relationship. We'll be looking at those deeply down the road some, but it wouldn't hurt at this point to really challenge yourself. What do I actually believe, really, about this higher power? What do I actually want in terms of a relationship with this higher power? Because that's what this is all about. This isn't some woo-woo kind of new age kind of dance. Yeah, thank you for laughing. No, this is serious human development. You want to be a full human being. We'll improve our consciousness because it will improve our behavior, and we will manifest in relationship with other people as in people of integrity and people who are aware of other and sensitive to other people's needs and concerns. Not in a codependent way. In fact, it will help your codependence so that in fact you'll be helping and not enabling. You'll keep your center of gravity deep inside yourself and not put those strings on circumstances and people where we become puppets of external puppeteers. More about that later on. I think that's a good start right now in terms of prayer and meditation. And an unpacking of the step 11 in the big book. We'll do more of it as we go down the road. It'll seep into our conversations in probably each of the steps, because we'll be looking at each of the steps through the lenses of prayer and meditation. Next week, we'll take a look at step 10, because it's about inventory. And Bill very clearly in step 10 and 11 suggests that inventory is hand in glove with meditation. If in fact the sunlight of the Spirit is deep down inside of us, which is his proposition in steps 2 and 3, this power, this God of our understanding, or quite frankly, I prefer the verbiage, the God of my not understanding, is deep down inside of me, the sunlight of the Spirit. I love the metaphor. Well, what blocks me from the sunlight are the clouds of my ego and the manifestations that come from instincts gone awry, he says in step 4. Clouds block the sunlight from me. And I need to dissipate and remove those clouds. Bill suggests even in step 11, an inventory at night. I didn't cover that because I don't want to stress that part. I wanted to stress the conscious development part. But he starts out his instructions about when we retire at night, and he's got several questions there. I don't today pay much attention to the questions, but I do review my day before I go to sleep. And if I fail to do that for whatever reason, I review it in the morning. There's no rules here. There's just suggestions. It's about looking back over your shoulder so that there's a constant awareness of how you can improve your thoughts and your attitudes and your feelings and your behavior, especially your behavior. And step 10 is a design tool during our waking hours, all of our waking hours, to do inventory when we're disturbed. We'll look at it again in the same way we looked at step 12, a piece of it. We looked at step 11, kind of superficial by at least my standards of it. And next week, we'll take a look at step 10 again, just to give you the sense of the nature of the tool that it is. With regard to step 11, I do recommend that you take a look at the Way of Life document. I think it's pages 45 to 50. And those are the 5 pages of an outline of the material from the big book, as well as incorporating some of the commentary and understanding from the 12 and 12, as well as a small section on incorporating some aspect of the contemplative practice. That's not in the big book, but since it's part of my practice, I felt that it would be a potential benefit to people to know about that. Father Keating established an organization around what he called centering prayer, the contemplative practice, and it's called Contemplative Outreach. There were 40 years ago. There were so many people from the 12-step community that really flocked to his organization and his methodology and practice concerning adding that to their step 11 practice, that he established a subgroup as part of his contemplative outreach, which is a 12-step group completely dedicated to 12-step people as part of his contemplative outreach. So if you wanted to Google that, you could find some additional information and maybe some summaries of the practice itself. And then continuing the work of assignment 2 that was started perhaps last week, item number 1, and then in assignment 2, looking at doing step 10 as instructed there in items 3, 4, and 5. Let's close with the serenity prayer, that wisdom prayer. Please embrace it. Think about the words. We don't have any or very little influence on anything outside of ourselves, very little on the inside of ourselves. And the realization that reality just is reality, that's wisdom, and that's what we want. God, grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, courage to change the things I can, and wisdom to know the difference. Thanks, everybody. Bye-bye.